In the early 19th century, there was this whole movement of people from the country into cities. So people would move from their farms out in the country into these large cities so that they could work. And this was a product of the Industrial Revolution. So what came of this was of everyone moving into the cities was that there was a lot of overcrowding. There was lots of people and not a lot of space. And also the city became very dirty. There was excrement in the streets, there was sewage in the streets, there was even sewage in their homes, and so the cities were dirty. And what this caused people to get sick, and they got diseases very easily in the city. And then they would spread the diseases very easily in these cities because, for example, if you got sick in one of these cities, then you might get your neighbor sick or your friend sick. And so everyone ended up just sort of getting each other sick, and the disease spread very quickly. And what this caused was that this caused people to die, actually. And so there was lots of deaths in these big cities. But the population stayed relatively the same because as many people that were coming in, there were that many people dying from disease. So the population stayed the same. And one of the biggest offenders of this overcrowding in the cities during the 19th century was Britain. Because if we recall, Britain was one of the first to industrialize, one of the first to have all the new inventions, and so it had this before everyone else did, and it was overcrowded and had people dying of disease before everyone else, because it was just the first to industrialize. And so the reason why diseases spread very quickly in these cities was because they were the cities that were being built on tiny pieces of land, just tiny pieces of land, and they had to fit everything together. They had to put houses next to houses and everything next to each other, so everything had to be one big thing together. And so you were right next to your neighbor was right next to you, all that kind of stuff. And that was because they didn't have any public transportation. So you couldn't get the school bus to school or the city bus. You couldn't just take the city bus over to your favorite restaurant. You had to walk there. So everything was built so that you could walk to it. It was all very close to you, and so they considered themselves walking cities. Also, the reason that there was no public health, so there was no toilets, there was no bathrooms, anything like that. And it said even that sometimes there were up to 200 people sharing one outhouse, which is pretty disgusting. And sometimes even the outhouses would be so full and no one would clean them out, and so they would just overflow into the streets like I talked about before. So these cities were just very unhealthy, but what that actually did cause was that it caused awareness. And so during the 1700s, everyone was really confused about health and disease and all of that. And so as you saw these diseases in these big cities, people began becoming more aware. They began knowing more of what was going on, and so you had all these public health movements to actually help this and to solve these problems, which is what they wanted to do, and it slowly got better.
Cleanliness was becoming an important improvement that some reformers were looking into. The most famous of these reformers was Edwin Chadwick, who was one of the commissioners charged with the administration of relief to paupers under Britain's revised Poor Laws of 1834. He was a follower of a radical philosopher, Jeremy Bentham, who believed in the saying, "greatest good for the greatest number." From applying the principles of Bentham, he proposed a sanitary idea that disease and death caused poverty by a sick worker being an unemployed worker and an orphan child was a poor child. He proposed that by cleaning the urban environment, this can be prevented. He collected reports on sanitary conditions and proved that disease was related to filthy environmental conditions. So then he thought of the idea to have a sewage system with the cheap iron pipes and tile drains of the industrial age. Chadwick's reports became the basis of Britain's first public health law, which created a national health board and gave cities authority to build modern sanitary systems. The public health movement won supporters all over Europe. Governments accepted at least limited responsibility for health of all citizens. European cities were making real progress towards better health, which lowered death rates all over Europe. Early reformers were handicapped by the miasmatic theory of disease, which is the belief that people contract disease when they breathe bad odors of decay and putrefying excrement. This theory was weakened by keen observation by doctors that transmission of disease was spread through filth but not caused by it. A guy named Louis Pasteur had a breakthrough which he explained in his germ theory of disease. He was a French chemist that studied fermentation. He found out that fermentation depended on the growth of living organisms, and the activity of these organisms could be suppressed by heating them, which is a process called pasteurization. This breakthrough implied that specific diseases were caused by specific living organisms called germs. The research continued, and then a guy named Robert Koch and his co-workers developed pure cultures of harmful bacteria and their life cycles. This made the research on germs explode. This led to the development of a number of effective vaccines. Through the germ theory, English surgeon Joseph Lister connected the problem of wound infection and aerial bacteria. He reasoned that a chemical disinfectant on a wound would destroy the life of the floating particles. This was his antiseptic principle. Through this, German surgeons began sterilizing all the things that entered the operating room. Through this health revolution, mortality rates declined dramatically and many diseases start to vanish. Death rates of people in urban areas were now equal or less than the rural areas. People all over Europe benefited from this.